Wow. All right. Thank you, Zoom. All right. So yeah, so May was really full. I packed it full of everything I could imagine. And then in June, I actually did rest. My family, we took a vacation. We went to Penticton and we sat by the lake and we did some beautiful things. And the rhythm actually did change. It was in June that I finally actually began to let go of the rhythm of being in the church, which is like work as much as you possibly can work, all the hours that you possibly want to give it. And so it was wonderful. And then I started getting ready to go, and I left for Israel on the 30th of June. And I flew to Toronto, and then there's a direct flight every day from Toronto to Tel Aviv. So I flew to Tel Aviv. And then I went to Tantour. And so I returned from Israel on the 31st of July. And on August 1st, I came back to work. So, nothing like hitting the ground running. That first week, Lena and Sonia kept me standing upright during the week while I was in my office. So it was really good. Took about 5 days for my body to like be back, or my sleeping patterns to change back. But it took like a full week for my stomach to decide that it wanted to eat at like noon and at 6 in Edmonton, because it was convinced it should be eating 9 hours ahead. So I should always be asleep or awake at the wrong times and eat. Anyway, it was a bit of a transition to get back. So, but when I was there, I was delighted to be part of a group. And this is the group. There was 12 of us from all over the world. Hubert is a seminarian from the Catholic Diocese of Galveston and Houston. Jenny and Justin. Justin is the barefoot bishop of South New Zealand. And so him and his wife came on his sabbatical and they participated in the program. Father Bob, is celebrated his 50th year of ordination while we were in the Holy Land. So it was a pretty remarkable accomplishment. Sister June, who her name is June, but when she meets you, she says, well, my name is Sister Johan, Sister Marie Johan. So when you take holy orders, you get a new name, which is a very appropriate thing, given the story that we heard this morning about the importance of names. So Sister Marie Johan was there. Helene and Tom are from California, and Helene is a lay leader in her local Catholic church, and Tom is a businessman. And he brought that mindset to absolutely every single encounter that we had the whole time we were together. He had the most remarkable amount of energy. Helene sometimes was like, you go, I'm going to stay here. She is a wise lady, a spiritual director by training with many gifts and skills. She actually runs a women's program for 160 women. So she brought this like depth of knowledge and spirituality to our group that was wonderful. Chris is also a Kiwi. He's from the Big Island. He is a Catholic priest, as was Carl. Carl was a Catholic priest. John was an Anglican priest from the UK. And Carl was from the US. Connie was a Lutheran pastor from the US, and me. So 12 of us in our fellowship, and 3 wise leaders. Rector at the Tantour Ecumenical Institute, his name is Father JP, and he is a Jesuit by training, but in Jerusalem, he worships with the Melkites, which is a Latin Eastern church. So they follow the Pope, but they use Eastern Christian rites for their worship, and they worship in Arabic. So it was quite an adventure to go to his church. His priest, the main priest at his church, did everything in Arabic, and he did his like 6 lines, because he was the assistant that day, in English. So you could sort of follow along in the bulletin. And then we had Sister Marie Feruza, the young woman in the middle. She's a nun out of France who speaks 5 languages, and she was sort of like our Gandalf. She took us everywhere. She answered all the questions. When you had an emergency, you could go to her. And on the left is Nizar, and he is the program director for the Tantour Institute. And He's the one who kept us up to date. So sometimes when you hear in the news about Israel or Palestine, the news is very scary. And Nazar is the guy who actually sent you the things you needed to know. So like there will be 20,000 protesters, which happened one weekend when I was in Israel or in Jerusalem, that they had walked from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in my time there. And Nazar was like, just be aware, don't go here, don't go there, like Parliament or the president's house, don't go those places. Yeah, so that was our group. And the very first day we were together, they had a reflection session, so we got to know each other. You know how you always do when you meet in a new group, you do like get to know you things. And then they took us on a tan tour. So the place is called Tan Tour, but like it was a play on words. And here we are in the beautiful outdoor garden with they have their own icon that was painted for them in the garden. And we started our tour and ended our very last day of being together in this same garden. And so that's a picture of the group of us that Nazar took our very first day as we were wandering around. It was the first, well, it was like my third day in Jerusalem, and it was 37 degrees because it's 37 degrees every day in Jerusalem in July. But the humidity was low, so it wasn't so bad. And if you stood in the shade, it was warmer than if you stood in the sun, and you mostly just needed to wear a hat and drink lots of water. In my head, I still hear both JP and Marie Feruza being like, drink water, drink water, drink water, drink water every time. Because once you know, but if you're dehydrated, you don't know you're dehydrated until you're already too far past your body helping you. So you need to drink water before you think you need it. All right. So let's talk about a typical day. A typical day in Israel on my course began with prayer in the tradition of whoever was leading it, and then often had a learning or an academic component from a lecturer. We often went to a tour or a historic site. We always closed with prayer, and that was the end of the official schedule. But then Tom was like, well, come to the Oasis Lounge and we'll have happy hour. So every day there was a happy hour. No, every day. It was amazing. I didn't go till the third week. And then I was like, boy, I've been missing out. So, because I was like tired at the end of the day. So I wasn't going to the happy hour. But then I started going and it was awesome. So I should have done it from the beginning. And then we would have supper. So the typical schedule in Israel is that they eat breakfast in the morning, but then they eat lunch kind of like 12:30 to 2 o'clock. And then dinner was offered from 6:30 till 8:30 in the Tantor dining room. So that was our kind of daily schedule. And our typical week was marked by almost daily mass. So either led by one of the Catholic fathers or by any of the rostered leaders at the request of Tom. Because first day he said in his introduction to himself, I am a daily communicant. Do any of you know what that is? Oh, a few nods. I didn't. It's someone who has communion every single day, which is a wonderful, kind of astounding thing to me. And so we did have communion most days. Typical week, always had time in the classroom, always went exploring. And then at Tantor in the program, they make space for reflection and sharing. So every week they give you 3 kind of reflecty questions, and then reflecty is not a word, but you know what I meant. 3 questions for you to think about and reflect on, and then a time for sharing. And when you sit with 15 people and you listen to each other's journeys, it's incredibly bonding. I feel close to these people, and I probably will for the rest of my life. And 2, it lets you in to see things in different ways that you maybe wouldn't have seen on your own. And so part of the blessing of my sabbatical was being in this group. And when I first saw the pictures, I thought, oh God, this is so scary. How am I going to do this? No one looks like me. Oh my God. Okay. A tiny bit worried that someone had sent their mugshot in, actually, but they didn't, just passport photos, same difference. So but it worked all right. And actually in the end, the people are what made it for me. So let's talk about Weekends. Weekends were meant to be a time for rest, they told us. So all week long, they say you might walk up to 12K a day. We mostly walk like 8 to 10K a day. And then you're supposed to take your time and take it easy. And then that's never what happened. I always walk double the number of steps on the weekend days that I walk during the week. So there's all sorts of things to do. One day I got lost with my friend Connie. We were looking for the Melkite Church in Jerusalem and couldn't find it, but we did find Santa's workshop. Okay. I did twice go to the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, which is the Lutheran church in Jerusalem, Old Town. We went to the National Israel Museum, which has a huge 50-to-1 scale of Jerusalem at the time of King Herod. So Jerusalem as it would have been when Jesus was alive. So there was it was an incredible exhibit. That museum is remarkable. If you are ever in Jerusalem, go to the National Israel Museum. One day we were taking it easy because we just come back from being in Galilee, and I was so tired. And then Jenny and Justin came and we're like, we're going to do the Ramparts walk. Do you want to come? And I was like, well, I've only taken like 2,000 steps today. Yeah, I guess so. So we went at 2:00 in the middle of the day to walk around the ramparts of Old Jerusalem. And we only did about a half, which was like 6.5 kilometers of walking in the sun at 37 degrees. I had thought coming back from Galilee, where it was 43 degrees, that I would never feel hot again. We got back, it was like 31 degrees in Jerusalem, and I was so cold. Like, I put on a long dress and long sleeves and closed-toed shoes, and I was like, I'm so cold. I went to church that chapel that night, and then I was like, I'll never be warm again. Next day, stayed in half the day, went on the Ramparts walk. I was like, no, I'll be hot again. Don't worry. I will be just fine. So we did all sorts of things. Let's talk a little bit about the lectures that I got to listen to and participate in. So where does the Bible come from and why do we need it? It was a 4-day lecture series brought to us by Father David Nyhouse, who's a Jesuit priest from South Africa. So he actually presented to us by Zoom, and every day we met with him and he taught us wonderful things. The first week, the last day, the Friday, we had a lecture called Palestine and Israel Narratives, which was given to us by a man named Itamar Shapira, who is like the farthest left Israeli in the world. And he told the story of his people and the Palestinian people in the most interesting and engaging way. And no other lecturer that we had or guide that we had ever quite went the same way or the same places. In the time that I was in Israel, there was some protests about a new law that was not particularly, actually quite undemocratic. And so that their parliament was trying to force through. And Itamar actually got himself arrested while we were there because he was hanging out with some Palestinian friends in another city and they got in trouble. And so he, like, literally, anyway, he was by far the most political of all the guides and lectures that I had. We had the history of the churches in Jerusalem from Hannah Benkowski, one of the most respected guides and lecturers in the Holy Land. She was remarkable. And when other guides heard that we'd had her, they were like, oh, you're so lucky. So we were quite lucky. We had the introduction to Judaism from Marcy Lenk from the Shalom Heart Institute. She did a wonderful lecture. Full day of lectures, actually, 6 hours. Bethlehem and the Wings of Hope was with Kamal. He took us to Bethlehem and then to the Wings of Hope Women and Children's. It's a clinic. It's a cycle. It's for providing support for those who are suffering from abuse, which when you're a Palestinian and you live in Bethlehem is like the going way of life. And so the need for this kind of work was really strong. So we enjoyed that day. Palestinian liberation theology from John Manayer. was really interesting. It was by far the most academic of every lecture. Sometimes, when someone is talking, they're really passionate, or they're talking from their own experience. And John was the only like teacher doctor who presented, like PhD teacher doctor. And so he presented it like academics. And so that was a really interesting kind of learning, because it was so different than all the other encounters that we had. In Nazareth and Galilee, our primary guide and teacher, his name was Rami Isaac, and he is a student at Hebrew University, where he is studying religion, believe it or not. Actually, evangelical pastor kind of pushed him down the path, and off he went. And so Rami brought his own take on our journey together. When we went to Hebron and the UNESCO World Heritage Site at Batir, Kamal was our guide again. And Mo, okay, so I don't actually even know how to say Mo's last name, because he was like, "Hi, I'm Mo," and then he proceeded to teach us things. So a brief introduction to Islam was done for us by Mo. So here's some pictures of my teachers. Here we are sitting in the beautiful classroom at Tantur. There was only a couple of us that routinely used our computers, and I made a best friend. My best friend on my trip his name was Hubert. He also brought his computer. We started being desk buddies because we sat at the back of the table, because then everyone else used paper and pen to take their notes. And we sat together, and that was nice. And then we ended up being bus buddies, because we sat together on the bus every time. One time I sat by someone else, and I actually had to apologize because I felt so bad about it. Jenny asked me to sit by her, so I sat by her, but then I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Hubert." So, all right. So, in the Holy Land, there are many places to visit. Let's see if you know any of these. Do you know what this is? The Wailing Wall. That's right, the Western Wall. So we also went to Bethlehem. The first week we had orientation tours. We had an orientation tour of Bethlehem. We had an orientation tour in the old city of Jerusalem. We went through the market, which you could do many times and still get lost, because I was there for a month and mostly only remember where the jewelry store is and which street the Lutheran church is on, because the priest at the Lutheran church told me, she said, "Oh, if you're trying to get here and you get lost coming down the street, you want to look for the Alabama Heart of Dixie store. It's the one where you turn right." Literally, like, here's the store, here's the alley, there's the church. So like, when you see the Alabama store, that's when you turn to go to the Lutheran church. I don't know. It was a good point of reference. We continue. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So this is a church that contains both the site of Golgotha, like the hill of the skull, which is the small picture in the right-hand corner. They have a chapel there now. They actually have two chapels there now. And then the big picture on your screen is of the Benedictine chapel. And the light is the light that pours into the sepulchre and actually on where the tomb of Jesus is. There's been debate over time where the tomb of Jesus might be found. Some say, how could it be in the city? It's not possible. No one buries their dead in the city. Jews don't bury their dead in the city, except the walls of the city change. And so they've proven now, using archaeology, that the Holy Sepulchre site is actually the place where the tomb of Jesus would have been. There was a belief there might have been in this like garden, and now it's called the garden tomb, and you can go and visit it, and it's a pretty good like visual for what the tomb might look like, but the actual physical location is in the Holy Sepulchre. And the Holy Sepulchre is a church full of chapels run by 5 denominations. Can you imagine being in a building where 5 different churches each think they get to be sort of in charge. So one of the things you can do if you're in the Holy Land for a while and you have the time is you can petition the Benedictines to stay overnight in the Holy Sepulchre after they close the doors. So every night at 9 o'clock, the Greek Orthodox Church closes the doors, and then you cannot get in or out unless they open the doors. And they open the doors at 6 in the morning because that's when people can start coming back. So, but you can apply with the Benedictines if you want to stay in the Holy Sepulchre, but you're not allowed to sleep and you're not allowed to eat. And so mostly you're just allowed to prayerfully be in this sacred space, and it is a sacred space. Also with rights over this building are the Syriac Church, the Armenian Church. Oh, this is embarrassing. Armenian, first Christian church, first Christian country in the world, the Armenian Church, the Syriac Church, the Benedictines, the Greek Orthodox, and the Ethiopian. The Ethiopian Orthodox. So 5 churches, all 6, all with dominion over this one physical building. It's a pretty remarkable place. So we also had tours outside of the old city, including on the Mount of Olives. So this is a view, this is Sister Marie Feruza teaching us. This is the view when you're standing on the Mount of Olives, looking at Jerusalem. This is the eastern wall. All down in front of us are the tombs. And then on the other side of the valley is the old city wall, which was first built and then maintained by Herod the Great. And then the one you mostly see now above the trees, that's the part of the wall that the Ottomans actually built. So, and this is the Kidron Valley. It's interesting that James today mentioned in his sermon the sacrifice of Isaac, because the Kidron Valley is the valley of wailing, because it's where families of the time would sacrifice their firstborn child to their gods in hopes of like blessings and fertility for their lands. And so that Abraham would have said, I'll give you my son, isn't a weird thing. That God would say, no, use this ram. That's the special part, which is a cool insight, right? Like I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone there and hadn't heard 2 separate guides tell me that. Also on our time, we went to the Garden of Gethsemane. If you go down the Mount of Olives to the bottom of the valley, you find the garden. And these are the olive trees. And olive trees are remarkable things because you can't see very well, but they get like holes in them and bugs eat them and birds drill in them, but they just keep living. And they just keep growing. And every time you think one is gone, it just comes back up from the roots. And it can grow in every direction or any direction. They are incredibly resilient trees. So this day, when we were there, we went to literally the walled off, it's called the Garden of Mary. And we had time for reflection. We had a worship service. And then they said, go and spend 10 minutes and just sit in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we all know that story, right? Where Jesus says, just sit and watch and pray with me for 1 hour, he says. So we didn't have an hour, but we had 10 minutes. That was quite a special and remarkable thing. And it's amazing to have the stories come alive in a new way, right? So there are so many churches to see when you go to the Holy Land. The tomb in the middle, that's the garden tomb. When you think about the kind of tomb they might have laid Jesus in, this is the kind of image you might have imagined. Is a door cut into rock, and then you'd go in and there'd be a place to lay the body, and then they'd have rolled a stone in front of it. The other long, tall picture here, that's from the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, which is a 18th century church built in a simple version of a Crusader church. Most churches in the Holy Land are full of stuff, like to the rafters, and the art and everything's amazing and decorated, and there's a reason and a purpose behind all of it, but not the Lutheran church. The Lutheran church is, like most Lutheran churches, just plain walls and bare floors, and the focus is the altar and the music, because they also have a beautiful pipe organ at the church. The Lutherans and the Anglicans, actually, we learned on one of our tours, were the revitalizers of the Holy Land. Following the Crusades and then the withdrawal of the Christians, and then many or several different Islamic or other orders being in charge of Jerusalem. In the 1870s, our Prussian Tsar went to the Holy Land on pilgrimage and discovered that it wasn't a very nice place. And so he got together with Queen Victoria, and they built a church, and they built a school, and they built a hospital, and they kind of started a race with all the other churches to see who could provide the best services to the people of the region. And the Lutheran Anglican, unlike Lutherans and Anglicans in Canada, who managed to be together for like 30 years, the Lutherans and Anglicans in Jerusalem managed it for 5 years before the Tsar and the Queen were like, nope, we'll each have our own church, thank you. And so the Lutherans built Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, and the Anglicans built St. George's. And at St. George's, they have the, it's like a 4-person hot tub version of a baptism font. You have to like climb into it, and then you can walk down the stairs and like swim in it if you want. They also have a regular one, but this is a way better picture. Also here pictured is the, on the upper right corner, that's a picture of the entryway at the monastery of the Armenians, and upper left. Yeah, if you're looking at it, upper left. Upper left. And here on the right, that's the Syriac church, with their curtain drawn back. Usually, if you are in an Eastern Orthodox church, the altar area is hidden. It's like the Holy of Holies. It's a very sacred place. But they were doing restoration work the day we went. And our guide said, oh, would you pull back the curtain? And they were like, well, we can't pull back the curtain, but let's ask the priest. And the priest came in and he pulled back the curtain. And so we got to see this beautiful altar that normally is hidden in the Syriac Orthodox Church. So in the week when we were doing Jewish studies, we, of course, went to the Western Wall. The Western Wall has 2 parts. There's the sacred part where Jews go to pray to this day. And then there's like the archaeological part where you can go and learn things. So we started on the learning side, and we talked about how do you tell what the different rock layers mean, and which ones are from Herod and which ones are from the Ottomans. And if you have any interest, I can tell you all about it. But then we went into the sacred side. And once you get through security, we were there on what must have been like a school holy day, because it was full of kids. And they separate you by gender. So there's a women's praying area and a men's praying area. And then you're allowed to go up to the wall. You're not allowed to use your phone. If you have a prayer book, you are allowed to use that. And then you pray. And then, like a king or queen of old, when it's time to be done, you back away because you've been in a sacred place. So it's quite a remarkable experience. And we stepped away and went up into one of the visitor centers after and had a small prayer service. But in our own tradition, our Christian tradition, but while we were there, it was quite moving to be surrounded by all these people of faith and to see like 13, 14, 15-year-old girls just sitting with their prayer books, filling the women's side of the wall area, just devoutly praying was incredibly moving, right? Like, I don't know how many 12, 13, 14-year-olds you know, but the ones that I know are not always that like prayerful. And they were it was a remarkable thing. Let's keep going. After that, we had a day we spent in Bethlehem. And let's be real, you could spend a month in Bethlehem and still not see everything. These are a few of the highlights. The picture in the center with the candles, that's the place where the manger is believed to have been inside the Church of the Nativity. The Church of the Nativity is the one that's in I am bad at left and rights. Anyway, on the top one corner. The Catholic Church is in the opposite bottom corner. The Catholic Church, which is the site where St. Jerome was sent to live, he wrote the Vulgate there. So the Bible that most Christians used for many years was the Vulgate, and he wrote it while he was in that place. This is also Bethlehem's where we went to Wings of Hope. We also went to the Shepherd's Field, literally the place where they say that the angels appeared to the shepherds. And while I was there, Kamal told this story that and he's Greek Orthodox, and his story was that that's the fields. I mean, there's way closer fields to the church in Bethlehem, way closer, but that all the fields around there would have been the fields where the youngest son of every family was watching each family's own sheep. Instead, this field is where they would have had all the sheep and lambs without blemish for sacrifice in the temple. And those are the sheep and the lambs that are cared for by hired laborers, by hired shepherds. So the angels appear to the hired shepherds, looking over the lambs set aside for the sacrifice in the temple, and bring them the good news of great joy that the true sacrificial lamb has been born. And I was like, I love that story. I think I'm going to use it forever. Yeah, because even if it's just a story, isn't it a wonderful way of understanding God's inbreaking into creation again when Jesus comes? In Bethlehem, we were also delighted to be invited to Kamal's house. Our guide took us to his house, which is a fairly traditional Palestinian home, which means downstairs they have like a kitchen and a dining room. And then each floor, as you go up, is a suite for family. So like the mom and dad live like on the first floor up, and then Kamal and his family live on the second floor. And they have a third floor, but it's for visitors, I think, for now, because he has a sister who lives with her husband's family, and then he has 3 siblings that live in the US. Boy, you didn't need that information. But anyway, I learned many things about all the people that we got to spend time with. Kamal's mom said, so many people come to the Holy Land and they just want to touch the rocks, right? They just want to be in the holy places, and they do those things, and it's wonderful and meaningful. But she said, the truth of the Holy Land is the people. It's the 5th gospel of being in and with and amongst the people that live in this land. And Kamal said, he said, I never want to get a passport because I think if I left, I might not come back, but I have to be here because I have things to do here. So it was a pretty remarkable experience. If we continue, the 3rd week of my time away, we left Jerusalem and went north. And on the way north, along the King's Road, which runs along the sea, sort of, which actually isn't anywhere near where anyone in the Bible would have walked, because that was like Phoenicia and Tyre and places that God's people didn't go. But we went there, and that's where we came to Mount Carmel. Do you guys remember the story at Mount Carmel? I'll tell you again. That's a good answer. Yes. The story at Mount Carmel is the one of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And so when we get to that story in the lectionary in the fall, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But it's the one end of the mountain range that leads you as you go north. So here we are looking out. In the far distance, you would see the sea. And the other way, you would see Nazareth. So, welcome to Nazareth. We arrived in Nazareth, and it was 42 degrees and humid. Yeah, it was awesome. Okay, and in Nazareth, there is many churches. Can you believe it? The big white one is the Church of the Annunciation, the place where the angel is said to have come to Mary. And inside of that church and outside, all along the walls and in the whole space, are depictions of Mary donated by different countries. And this one here on the left that is like circles, that's the Canada one. And when I saw it on Tuesday night, the guide, we got there and Rami said, well, you can go look at the church because it's beautiful. And it was like 6 steps from the place, the nunnery where we were staying. Or you can go visit the sister. There's a whole bunch of stuff to see. So he was like, you can just wander around tonight. And so I went with Hubert and we went to the church. And I looked at all these beautiful depictions of Mary as every kind of nationality in the world, like Japanese and Thai and Filipino and Spanish and Italian. And this is what Canada gave. I was like, oh God. The next day I'm complaining to Miss Helene. I'm like, every other country. Okay, the US is equally bad. Actually, theirs is worse than ours, but not a lot. And so I was like, every country gave these beautiful depictions and mine gave this. And she's like, I love this. She said, you can see possibilities here. It's not one single vision of what Mary would look like, but the possibility of what Mary might be for anyone. And I was like, okay, nope, you're right. Let's do that. It was, once again, the beauty of being in a group with different perspectives and different voices to teach us different things. We got to have worship. We had a mass in the Church of the Annunciation, and Father Carl presided for us. We went to the synagogue church, which is both a synagogue and a church built on the site of the synagogue that would have been in Nazareth. So this is where Jesus went to synagogue, right? Is this place. You have to go down because everything in Israel is down. When you look for history, you never look at the ground. You have to look under the ground to find it. Oh, yeah. Oh, hey, James, could you call a cab for the pastor? Yep, that was on my list of things between the service and the forum, and that didn't happen. And now he's waiting and has been waiting for 40 minutes. Okay, sorry. All right. You can see here also there's a statue. This is the statue of Joseph. There is some traditions in the Eastern Orthodox churches where Joseph and Mary are married, but they never consummate their relationship. So they're a family and it's a sacred thing, but they're never married. And so they always need their own things. So there's a Church of the Annunciation or Church of Mary, and then there's a Church of Joseph and the Holy Family, but it's a different church. And you have to walk like around the street to get there. And here's the statue of Joseph that's actually on the path from the Church of the Annunciation to the Church of the Holy Family. And his knees are worn thin from all the people who touch him to get a blessing. And the part you can't see in this picture is that behind him, instead of like sitting on a rock like you might think, he's in fact sitting on an angel. Because the reason that Joseph doesn't divorce Mary is the angel. And so the Holy Family gets to be the Holy Family because of that. So after our time, I'm going to try and flip the page for the people at home. After our time in Nazareth, we went to by the shores of the sea. Once again, we'll go back to Tolkien because there's no one's words who are better than him. And there by the shores of the sea, we discovered Magdala. So for many years, they've known where Tiberias is, and they know where Capernaum is, but somehow Magdala, like Mary of Magdala, got lost. And it was lost for almost 2,000 years. And it got found, like in 2006, when a group of believers from Mexico decided to come to the Sea of Galilee and build a resort. But when you want to build something in Israel, you have to do an archaeological survey before you begin building. So they start digging down and they start using their ground penetrating radar, and they discover this is the synagogue at Magdala. So they had to move their resort 200 feet to the side. And now they have a beautiful church and archaeological site you can see, all here on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And it was quite remarkable. And Miss Helene feels a particular connection to Mary, the mother of Jesus. So although it was 43 degrees and we were outside standing in the sun, she led us through a Christmas devotion, giving thanks for Mary and celebrating the places of women in the story. And so Galilee was remarkable. We got to go on a boat, like a fishing boat. They tried fishing in the middle of the day without any bait. So like, I don't know what kind of fish they thought they were going to catch, but we didn't catch any fish. But we did go on a boat, which always makes me happy. And I led a devotion, and I went looking in the Bible for like stories about the Sea of Galilee. And there were so many stories, I literally couldn't pick them. So after picking 6 short readings, I was like, I think I better not pick any more readings. This is supposed to be like a 5-minute devotion. But I gave a devotion. Also on the shores of the Sea of Galilee are the Church of the Multiplication, which is the picture in the one corner. Also the primacy of Peter, the place where Peter is said to have been called the rock on which the church will be built. Also the place where the popes always go. It's like a holy pope place. And then Capernaum. And Capernaum is the place where Jesus would have done his teaching and his where he would have engaged with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And we sat just outside looking at the Sea of Galilee, enjoying the view at Capernaum, and it was quite beautiful. While we were in Galilee, James will advance the screen. There you go. We heard many times, Jesus spent 30 years in Nazareth, 3 years in Capernaum, and 3 days in Jerusalem. Tells you something about his life, right? Which is actually not something that we often focus on. I learned that until he was 30, you know that story where Jesus says, it's not time yet, I shouldn't do any miracles, right? You know that story? Turns out if you aren't 30, you're not considered an elder. And miracles done by people who aren't elders don't count. So if he had done miracles before that, which seems not impossible, they wouldn't have counted. So he was like, so interesting that that's the thing. So after he turns 30, he leaves Nazareth, gets thrown out of Nazareth. We went to the hill where there's said to have thrown him off. Of course, he disappears from amidst them. Do you remember that story? And then we went north, and we went to Capernaum, which is where Peter's mother-in-law's house is. There's a beautiful new church there. We had worship inside this beautiful church, which was all glass looking at the sea. And you know, the most distressing part about the whole thing was that this beautiful bird was trapped inside this glass hexagon with us. And it just kept flying. It kept looking and looking and looking how to get out. And finally, Rami like stood by the door and was like, over here, over here. It was sort of distracting in the worship, but at least the bird got out in the end. It made my heart happy. I felt fed. So after that, after we were finished in at the Sea of Galilee, which we got to swim in, which was quite nice until we discovered there were snakes in the water, so we got out of the water. They did say several times, don't go swimming. You swim at your own risk. The tantra was like, you cannot go swimming. We are not letting you go swimming. If you do something on your own, that's on you. And and we did. And then there was snakes. So it was, you know, a thing. Yeah. So we continued after that and went to Mount Horeb, which is where the transfiguration happened. And you remember the story. Jesus is there and he's transfigured before his disciples. And they say, let's build you a house. Let's build 3. And then, so do you see there's 3 like shapes, 3 houses there, right? On that church, which did get built. Actually, and this is not the first church on the site. This is an 18th century, 19th century church, but also quite lovely. We had a mass, and we also had one of our weekly reflections there. So we went in their outdoor chapel, and all 12, 14 of us sat down, and we spent some time sharing the stories of our own experiences. And, you know, it's a pretty remarkable thing to hear everyone's story unfolding as you go through the journey. And so the stories that we told on the first day when we met were very different than the kinds of stories we were telling each other, well, on the last day when we were having dinner in Tel Aviv. When we returned to the Jerusalem region, we went to Hebron. And Hebron is a city which should be under the control of the Palestinian Authority. It's in the West Bank. It should be a Palestinian city. But about 10 years ago, settlers started moving into Hebron. And where Israeli settlers go, the Israeli security forces follow, because the security forces' job is to keep the settlers safe all the time. So they moved into Hebron and they decided that they wanted to live in the market, in like the market of Hebron. And so they started throwing their garbage out the windows onto the street. So the Palestinians put up a screen so they could keep the garbage off. And then they started throwing like kitchen waste out. And then the security forces are always there, fully armed, keeping people safe. And so Hebron is a city that's transformed. So these days, the market at Hebron, the main market square, and the fruit and vegetable market are totally closed. No Palestinian is allowed to drive or they're not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to shop. They're not allowed to literally be in their own city, in the parts where the settlers are. So to get into so there's a particular street that they took us down, and it's an Israeli street. And you have to cross a security checkpoint to get in. And then you walk down the street, and everywhere you see, there's Israel flags. Or there's buildings that have Star of David drawn on them. Because those are buildings which are being claimed by the Israeli settlers. You finally get through the whole street, and then you get out, and then you're back in a vibrant Palestinian city. When you're outside of the settler zone, it's totally a normal Palestinian city in every way. I even saw a donkey in Hebron, which is probably not that normal, but was quite exciting. And one of the things that Palestinians do in particular to make sure their presence is heard and felt is they use graffiti, which is a art that many people have used, many oppressed people have used for many years, right? Like it's not a new thing. These ones say, boycott Israel. Existence is resistance. Or make love, not walls. In Bethlehem, Banksy, who's a famous graffiti artist, has a hotel called the No View Hotel. Anyway, it's like totally blocked in by these huge cement walls, and all around this is graffiti art and all sorts of things. And Hebron was the most clear depiction of what occupation looks like, right? Most of the other places that the Tantour course took us on my time there, we were in a Palestinian area or we were in an Israeli area, and it was totally fine. There wasn't an issue. We didn't see the conflict really at all until we went to Hebron. And Hebron was remarkably heartbreaking for that, to be in the midst of it. Just today, yesterday was the Day of Atonement, which is one of the highest Jewish holy days. And so they blocked off all the streets that lead to Bethlehem and to the Palestinian suburbs in the West Bank, so that the Israelis who live in the West Bank would have free access to come and go from Jerusalem. Like, Nizar sent me pictures. They closed the road. You couldn't even get an ambulance through if you needed it. They closed the road in front of Tantour. It is, sometimes you don't see it and sometimes you do. We did also engage a little bit with the Islamic tradition. We got to go, we had special permission and got to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. I don't know if when you look at pictures of Jerusalem, you most often actually see the wall and Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock. And there's like 8,000 kilos of gold paint on the top of the Dome of the Rock. That was painted in 1996 by the King of Jordan. The area on the top of the Temple Mount, so this whole area that's now a mosque, is owned by the Ministry of the Interior of Jordan and Jordan. And they have a waft. It's like a trust that maintains the holy sites. And Jews are not supposed to go there. No Jew is supposed to go there, including the ones who sometimes do, like politicians, and they get in lots of trouble, and it causes trouble politically and also causes trouble on both the Jewish side and for the Islamic side. The Dome of the Rock sits over the place where Abraham was said to have gone to sacrifice Isaac. One, so it's a Jewish holy site. And also it's the place where Muhammad went up to heaven and came back down with the rules about praying 5 times a day. So it's an incredibly sacred place for 2 of the world's largest religions. On the last day of our tour, we went to the Jordan River. And the Jordan River used to be like big and wide and deep. And now it's like 6.5 feet across, or maybe 12 feet across. It's not wide or that deep because water is life in Israel. And so the tributaries that used to feed the Jordan are diverted all over the place now that they never used to be. So in Jesus's time, there was a big river there. Now it's not such a big river. So when you're there, there's also security forces, and you know that they're fully armed, and you know that on the other side in the church that you can almost sort of see in the background through the trees, that they also have security on the Jordanian side. we had a service of baptismal remembrance and blessing. And so I received a blessing from Father JP that day. It was quite meaningful. We had an adventure at the Dead Sea. You know, you got to go and swim as much as you can, or stay upright as best you can, see how it goes. Lowest point in the world. But they say that the Dead Sea is dying. So climate change is everywhere, not just here. It's shrinking, and in fact, it should be doing the opposite, because the next continental divide is supposed to happen at the lowest place on Earth, which is the Dead Sea. But because it's shrinking, they don't know that that's going to happen. So there were a few surprise additions to my time while I was away. One is I met with Rabbi Mark Bloom. I have a very dear friend named Karen Stepko, who's a pastor in Saskatchewan. And she is online friends with Rabbi Mark. Rabbi Mark is like the rabbi at the Temple Beth Israel in California, is that maybe San Francisco? Anyway, he was on a 3-month sabbatical in Israel, and I was in Israel. And so Karen was like, you should meet Rabbi Mark. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. So I met Rabbi Mark. He talks like super fast. And we went walking on a Sunday afternoon after church for about 3 straight hours. I had my first ever falafel. It was awesome. It was at his insistence. The first place we wanted to go, the line was too long. So we were like, well, we'll just walk another 5K and get another one. So that's what we did. And the other thing is the thing that I love doing is that I got to go sailing. So one day on a different Sunday, I hired a boat from the port at Jaffa, and I went out with the captain, and we went under sail on the Mediterranean, and then we stopped sailing and we jumped in the water. I jumped in the water. He had to stay on the boat, and then we got back on the boat and ate some fruit and drank some champagne. It was pretty wonderful, kind of a thing. Last 2 slides, I promise. So my most surprising religious experience. You know, there is many things in the Holy Land that might stir someone's spirit or not. Lots of people go there because they want to be where Jesus was and they want to touch the things that Jesus would have done. But once again, it's 2,000 years in a country that's like sand. So you have to go like under street level to find anything from the time of Jesus. But in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is down, they have a rock called the Rock of the Anointing. It said when they took Jesus's body down from the cross, they laid his body on the ground, and his mother would have done a basic anointing so they could put him in the tomb before the Sabbath, right? And that rock is a sacred place. And the first day we were there, the first time I went to the Holy Sepulchre, there was like, I don't know, 100 Japanese tourists in matching bright yellow t-shirts. It was not particularly religious feeling. And they were very crowded around the Rock of the Anointing. They were crowded everywhere. There was lots of them. And we were only 12, so we never felt crowded. But on the second time we went to the Holy Sepulchre, I had a moment where I was the only one in that whole atrium, where I was the only person in the whole area where the Rock of the Anointing was. And so I did a thing that I don't normally do, and I got down on my knees and I touched that rock. And it broke me open to be in a place where a mother would have been saying goodbye to her son. And just the knowledge of who that was and what it means for us, it took me like a week to stop crying. And then another week to get better. But it was alive. And there's not even hardly words for it, because it was so alive and so precious. And so I am grateful that I had the opportunity to go, and that you all sent me with your support and your prayers. I know you were praying. So thank you for that. Yeah. My other most cherished memory is one day we were in the bus We're driving down the road along the side of the Sea of Galilee. And Rami says, look out the window. And I'm like, oh God, okay, what's up? And Rami's like, look out the window, what do you see? And we're like trees, like rocks, like road. And then we also saw some farmers' fields. And he said, you know, this is where Jesus told the story of scattering the good seed. He said, and some falls on the rocks, and some falls on the path, some falls on the good soil. And he said, and here you are, in the place where Jesus said it, looking out the window at the place where he said it. And so it's alive in a wonderful way. And the rocks and the trees and the paths and the good soil are the same as here, but they're also not the same as here. And so to know that and to have been there is quite a remarkable thing. All right. We are at an hour. I don't know whether we want to keep going or you want to, let's call it for today. And thank you all for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed. Yeah, do you want? Yeah.
Yes. Carl had another commitment and had to leave, so he asked me to finish moderating this session. So he did say earlier that we were going to have an opportunity for Q&A. So the time being what it is, we are going to have a Q&A, but feel free to leave. There's so much interesting information here. Let's give Pastor Ann an opportunity to respond to some questions or observations you might have. Any questions, comments? I will bring the mic to you so that you can ask them.
Oh. I did say there's 10
you can hold the
sessions worth of info. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It is awesome. I can't even imagine your experiences, but I can feel for you, and you have made me feel like I was there with you.
Thank you, Ms. Gladys. Thank you all for staying and for listening. I sure appreciate your time.
Anyone else? No? Okay.
You can also ask me, yes, anytime. I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, Pastor Anna has taken us, she talked about the different layers. We skimmed along the top layer today. There'll be other opportunities maybe to go deeper. But thank you very much for the preparation and presenting what you did today.